Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to dig into something pretty cool, plant propagation.
It's amazing how many people want to get their thumbs a little greener, right?
It really is. And we've got a fantastic guide to help us out straight from the experts at NC State Extension Publications. We're talking about everything from those seed packets we all know
Yeah.
to techniques I bet most people haven't even heard of. Like, did you know you can basically clone some plants from just a single leaf?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the things we'll dive into. When we talk about propagation, there are really two main paths you can take.
Okay.
There's the kind of classic way, sexual propagation using seeds.
Right.
And then there's asexual propagation, which is where we get into using parts of the plant itself.
So it's like plant parents versus plant clones, in a way.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And each one has its own advantages, right?
Yep, for sure.
So with seeds, you've got that cost effectiveness that everyone loves.
Right.
And you get the chance to see some really interesting variations pop up in the new plants. Plus, starting with seeds can actually be a natural way to avoid certain plant diseases.
Huh. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So when would you actually choose to go the asexual route instead of just starting from a seed?
Well, imagine you've got this rose bush.
Okay.
And it's got the most incredible blooms you've ever seen. Asexual propagation is how you make a copy of that, an exact replica with all those same amazing characteristics.
Oh, wow.
Plus, for some plants, it's
Yeah.
actually much faster to grow a whole new plant that way. Like when you take cuttings from a houseplant, you're basically skipping the whole seed part entirely.
Okay, let's dig into the whole seed thing a bit more then. The guide gets pretty in-depth about the science of it. It even talks about how to store seeds properly. Who knew your fridge could be a gardener's best friend?
It's true. Storing your seeds correctly can make a huge difference in how well they actually germinate, how many sprout up. Those little packets are full of potential, but they need the right environment to thrive.
Yeah.
You got to keep them cool and dry. An airtight container in the fridge can actually make some seeds last even longer.
Really?
Yeah, it's all about protecting that little plant embryo that's tucked inside.
Plant embryo? That's kind of cool to think about. The guide also mentioned something called open-pollinated seeds. What makes them different?
Open pollinated seeds, those are for the gardeners who really want to embrace, the wild side a bit.
Okay.
These seeds come from plants that were pollinated naturally out in the environment, by insects, the wind, bees buzzing around your garden doing their thing. And
Yeah.
the cool part is, their offspring, the new plants, might be a little different from the parent plants. So it's a cool way to get some more variety in your garden.
Oh, so it's like a surprise pack of plant potential.
Yeah.
I love that. Now, the guide mentions that not every seed is going to sprout right away as soon as you put it in the dirt.
Right.
It talks about seed dormancy.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is that?
So dormancy, that's kind of like a survival tactic that plants have developed over thousands of years. You see, just because a seed looks ready to go, it doesn't mean it's actually the right time to germinate, to sprout.
Okay.
They've evolved this way to make sure they sprout when the conditions are perfect.
So it's like they have a safety mechanism built in so they don't sprout during like a drought or if there's a frost.
Exactly. For seeds, timing is everything. Sometimes dormancy is triggered by something external, like temperature or how much moisture is in the soil.
Right.
But sometimes it's internal, controlled by the seed itself. It's like it has a little clock inside, making sure everything's just right before it, makes its big debut.
That's wild. So how do we wake those sleepy seeds up? The guide mentioned something called scarification. That sounds kind of intense.
It's not as intimidating as it sounds. Scarification basically just means we're giving that tough seed coat a little help. Out in nature, this happens naturally all the time. Freezing temperatures, those tiny microbes in the soil. Even an animal's digestive system can do it.
Well,
And we can actually copy those natural processes to help the seeds germinate.
so we're kind of like fast forwarding through nature's methods to give those seeds a jump start.
Exactly.
Okay, so what are some ways we can do this scarification thing at home?
There are a few different techniques, and some are definitely easier than others. I know some commercial growers, they use a method with sulfuric acid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that one's definitely best left to the pros, trust me. It required some serious caution. For your average gardener, there are much safer options. You can try just nicking or sanding the seed coat very gently. That's called mechanical scarification.
Okay.
Or if you're feeling a little adventurous, you can experiment with the hot water method.
Hot water.
Yeah, just hot water. You got to be careful. Make sure to let the water cool down a bit before you add the seeds. We don't want to cook them.
Good point. Now we've got our seeds all prepped and raring to go, or almost. The guide also mentions this thing called stratification. What's that all about?
Stratification, that's another way we can encourage those dormant seeds to wake up. But with this one, we're not focused on the seed coat.
Okay.
We're actually trying to recreate the natural conditions a seed would experience over the winter. So we're messing with the temperature and the moisture levels a bit.
So we're basically tricking the seeds into thinking they've already gone through a winter slumber, like a little vacation for plants.
You could say that. This is especially important for plants that come from places with cold winters.
Okay.
And there are two main types of stratification: cold and warm.
Okay.
So cold stratification. That usually involves putting the seeds in something moist, like sand,
Right.
peat moss, and then you stick them in, you guessed it, the refrigerator.
Makes sense.
But you got to do it for the right amount of time, which depends on the plant. Warm stratification, it's a similar idea, but instead of the fridge, we're looking for a nice, balmy temperature, somewhere around 68 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit.
So like springtime warmth.
Exactly.
Wow, this is fascinating stuff. Like we're cracking a secret plant code. So we've given those seeds their wake-up call. Does that mean we're finally ready for planting?
Well, hold on there. We've got a whole other side to plant propagation, to explore asexual propagation. Remember, this is where we bypass the whole seed thing entirely.
Right. So we've covered the birds and the bees, or I guess the lack of birds and bees of plant propagation.
Right.
And now we're moving on to the plant cloning portion of the show.
Exactly.
So where do we even begin?
Let's start with cuttings. Cuttings are super popular,
Okay.
and they can be used for a ton of different plants. You can take cuttings from stems, leaves, roots, even those canes you see on some plants. It all depends on, what kind of plant you're working with. You got to choose the right cutting.
So it's like we're picking the right tool out of our gardening belt. Each cutting is good for something different.
That's a great way to think about it. Each one has its own special talent. For instance, if you've got woody ornamentals like roses or hydrangeas, even some trees, stem cuttings are the way to go. And you can even break stem cuttings down further. There's softwood cuttings, semi-hardwood cuttings, and hardwood cuttings, all depending on how mature the wood is. It's amazing how those little differences can impact whether or not the cutting is successful.
It's so fascinating. What about those leafy cuttings you mentioned? Can you actually grow an entire new plant from just a leaf?
You absolutely can. Believe it or not, some plants can sprout a whole new root system and shoots from just one leaf. Or even just a piece of a leaf.
Get out.
It's true. Think about snake plants. They're super resilient.
Yeah.
African violets, very popular.
Right.
Even some succulents, they're pros when it comes to leaf propagation.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so we've got stem cuttings, leaf cuttings. You mentioned root cuttings earlier, too. Those sound a bit, I don't know, hardcore.
They're definitely less common than stem or leaf cuttings.
Okay.
But still super cool. Basically, you're taking a piece of a healthy root
Right.
and coaxing it into becoming a whole new plant.
Wow.
It's a great option for things like raspberries, lilacs. Even certain types of trees can be propagated this way.
I'm looking at my garden in a whole new light after this. What other asexual propagation secrets do you have up your sleeve?
Okay, let's talk about layering. This is where we're encouraging roots to grow on a stem while it's still attached to the main plant.
So we're like giving those baby plants a little boost before we send them off on their own.
That's a great way to put it. We're creating the perfect environment for those roots to develop. And there are a bunch of different types of layering too, each one best suited for a certain kind of plant.
Okay, like what? Give me some examples.
So there's tip layering. With tip layering, you're just burying the tip of the stem in the soil. Then you've got simple layering. Simple layering is when you bend a stem down and just cover a section of it with soil.
Okay.
And then for the houseplant lovers out there, don't forget about air layering.
Oh, right, air layering.
With this one, we're encouraging those roots to grow on the stem, but above the ground. It's awesome for houseplants that are getting a little leggy.
It would be great for some of mine, that's for sure. Are there any other ways to do this asexual propagation thing?
Yeah, absolutely. There's separation and division. These are perfect for plants that naturally grow in clumps or have offshoots.
So we're just like gently separating them instead of taking cuttings.
Exactly. It's all about working with how the plant naturally grows. Think about irises. They're so vibrant.
Beautiful.
Daylilies, always cheerful. Or even ferns you've got inside. They practically beg to be divided.
This is seriously cool. I feel like I've unlocked some kind of like secret gardening superpower today. You mentioned budding and grafting earlier. Those sound a bit more, well, surgical.
You're not wrong. They're definitely more advanced,
Okay.
but they're super useful for certain plants, and you can even create some really unique hybrids this way.
Okay, I'm going to need a crash course here. What exactly is involved in budding and grafting?
Okay, so with budding and grafting, what you're doing is taking a bud or sometimes a cutting from one plant that's called the scion,
The scion, got it.
and you're attaching it to another plant called the rootstock. The rootstock is what provides, you guessed it, the root system for the new plant.
Okay,
So it's kind of like you're playing matchmaker, but with plants.
I love it. Plant matchmaker. So what's the secret to making sure the graft takes, like, how do you know if it worked?
It's not quite as simple as just sticking two plants together and hoping for the best.
Oh.
The key is making sure the scion and the rootstock are compatible with each other. They have to be related botanically for it to really work.
So no grafting a rose onto a cactus, huh?
Probably not going to have much luck with that. Successful grafting takes some planning and a delicate touch. It's a really interesting mix of science and art, actually.
I bet. So how do you actually do it? What are some common ways to graft plants?
One of the most common methods is called T-budding.
T-budding.
Yep. You make a T-shaped cut on the rootstock,
Okay.
and then you insert a bud shield that's a bud from the scion into that cut,
And that's it.
pretty much.
Yeah.
This is how a lot of fruit trees are propagated. Imagine having a single tree that produces different types of apples.
That would be amazing. It'd be like a fruit salad, but on a tree.
Mm.
Okay, what other kinds of grafting are there?
Another common one is called cleft grafting.
Cleft grafting.
Yeah. This one's often used to breathe new life into old fruit trees or even create those really cool weeping forms you see. You know, the ones that add a lot of drama to the garden?
I love those. So dramatic.
Right.
So how does cleft grafting work?
Basically, you make a cleft, which is basically a split in the rootstock,
Right.
and then you wedge in a piece of scion wood that's been cut to fit. It's a bit more, I guess you could say, invasive than T-budding, but it can be super effective.
Wow. This is honestly so much more than I ever thought there was to know about plant propagation. It's incredible what you can do when you really understand how to work with nature. So we've covered seeds, cuttings, layering, even grafting. Is there anything else to learn about in the world of plant propagation?
Well, there's one more technique we haven't talked about yet, micropropagation. And this is where it gets really interesting, really high tech.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Imagine taking a tiny little part of a plant, maybe even just a single cell, and using that to grow a whole new plant.
Wow, that sounds straight out of science fiction.
It kind of is. It's like the ultimate form of plant cloning. And it's becoming more and more common, especially in research labs and big nurseries. They use it to produce a ton of plants, all with the exact traits they want.
So those perfectly identical orchids you see at the store.
Exactly.
Or disease-resistant fruit trees.
That's how they're doing it, micropropagation.
Huh. Not something I'll be trying in my backyard anytime soon.
Yeah.
But still super cool. So we've gone from the super simple stuff, like starting from seeds, all the way to the seriously complex, like grafting and this micropropagation. Any last words of wisdom for our listeners who want to try some of this at home?
Just remember, patience is key when you're dealing with plants. Propagation can be so rewarding, but it definitely takes time.
For sure.
So don't get discouraged if those first few tries don't turn out exactly how you planned.
Right.
It's all part of the learning process. Oh, and speaking of processes, don't forget to harden off your plants.
Hardening off.
Yeah.
Right, that's important.
Yeah, you got to give those plants that have been living the good life indoors a little boot camp before you stick them outside permanently.
It's like helping them acclimate to the real world.
Yeah.
No more pampering.
Exactly. You want to introduce them to sunlight, wind, temperature changes, all that stuff gradually so they'll thrive once they're out in the elements.
Good advice. Well, this has been incredible. I feel like I need to go buy all the plants now.
I might have inspired you then.
Definitely. Before we wrap things up, any last thoughts for our listeners out there?
You know, the next time you're admiring a beautiful flower or a tree or any plant, really, think about where it came from. Was started from a seed, a tiny cutting,
Right.
maybe even a successful graft. It really adds a whole new level of appreciation when you understand what it takes to get those plants to grow.
It really does.
Yeah.
Wow. Who knew there was so much to learn about the world of plant propagation? Thanks for joining us today for this episode of The Deep Dive, and we'll catch you next time for another fascinating deep dive into, well, something cool.